The snowflake landed on my smartphone screen exactly as I predicted it would, just 3 minutes after my heated driveway sensor had detected the temperature drop. And I realized in that moment that my entire winter was about to become a living nightmare thanks to Patricia Hendricks from the HOA. I'm Kyle Watson, and I've lived in the Riverside Meadows subdivision in Bloomington, Minnesota for exactly 2 years now. When I bought my house on Maple Ridge Drive, I thought I'd made the smartest investment of my life. The house was beautiful, the neighborhood was quiet, and the amenities were decent. What I didn't account for was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman named Patricia who apparently had nothing better to do than make everyone's life miserable. The whole mess started on a Wednesday morning in early November. I'd just finished installing a state-of-the-art heated driveway system with smart sensors that could detect incoming precipitation and temperature drops. Living in Minnesota, this wasn't just a luxury, it was practically a necessity. The system cost me $15,000, but I figured it was worth every penny. No more waking up at 5 in the morning to shovel snow. No more slipping on ice while carrying groceries. No more throwing out my back trying to clear 2 feet of powder after a blizzard. The sensors were small, discrete devices mounted along the edges of my driveway. They connected to my home network and communicated with the heating elements embedded beneath the concrete. The whole system was automated, efficient, and according to the manufacturer, completely undetectable to the naked eye unless you knew what you were looking for. Patricia knew what to look for. I was drinking my morning coffee when I heard the sharp rap on my door. When I opened it, Patricia stood there with her clipboard, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch in the November wind, wearing a beige cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mr. Watson," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that people use when they're about to ruin your day. "I've noticed you've made some modifications to your property." "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice friendly. "What modifications are you referring to?" "The sensors along your driveway. They weren't there last week during my neighborhood inspection." "Oh, those. Yeah, I had a heated driveway system installed. Pretty cool, right? Once winter really hits, I won't have to worry about snow removal at all." Her expression hardened. "Did you submit a modification request to the Architectural Review Committee?" My stomach dropped. "A modification request? Patricia, they're just small sensors. You can barely see them." Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that any external modifications, additions, or alterations to the visible property must be approved by the committee before installation. This includes but is not limited to sensors, decorative elements, structural changes, and technological devices. You've got to be kidding me. They're tiny black boxes that sit flush with my driveway. Nobody even notices them. "I notice them," Patricia said, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "You have 72 hours to submit a modification request form, or you'll need to remove them. If you fail to comply, you'll be fined $500 per day until the violation is corrected." $500 per day. That's insane. "Those are the bylaws, Mr. Watson. You signed them when you purchased your home. I suggest you familiarize yourself with them." She turned on her heel and walked back down my front path, leaving me standing in the doorway, my coffee growing cold in my hand. I immediately called my real estate attorney, Gerald Simmons, who I'd worked with during the home purchase. After explaining the situation, he gave me the bad news. "Kyle, I hate to say this, but she's technically correct. The HOA bylaws in Riverside Meadows are some of the most restrictive I've seen. Did you review them before installation?" "Gerald, they're 200 pages long. I skimmed them." I didn't think heating elements under my driveway would be an issue. The problem isn't what's under your driveway, it's what's visible on top of it. If those sensors can be seen, even minimally, they constitute an external modification. So what do I do? Submit the form and hope they approve it. There was a long pause on the other end. Kyle, I'll be honest with you. The Architectural Review Committee in your HOA has a 97% rejection rate. They've denied requests for mailbox replacements, doormat changes, and even a request to plant roses in a front yard because they weren't the approved color. You're telling me I just wasted $15,000. Submit the form anyway. Document everything. If they reject it, we might have grounds to challenge their decision, but it'll be a long process. I spent that entire afternoon filling out the modification request form. It required detailed specifications, photographs from 8 different angles, a written statement explaining the necessity of the modification, and 3 copies of everything because apparently we were living in 1995. I submitted it the next day, well within Patricia's 72-hour ultimatum. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter. The Architectural Review Committee, consisting of Patricia and 2 other board members, had reviewed my request and denied it. Their reasoning was that the sensors disrupted the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood and set a precedent for technological intrusions that could diminish property values. I called Gerald again. They denied it. What now? You have 2 options. Remove the sensors or appeal the decision. The appeal process takes 60 days and requires a hearing in front of the full HOA board. And during those 60 days, you'll be in violation. They can fine you. So I'm screwed either way, pretty much, unless you want to remove the sensors temporarily while we go through the appeal. The problem was, the sensors were integrated into the system. Removing them would require tearing up portions of my driveway, effectively destroying the entire heating system. The installation company had made that very clear. It was an all-or-nothing setup. I decided to file the appeal. The 60-day waiting period would take me into January, right into the heart of Minnesota's winter season. The first major snowfall was predicted for late November, just a few weeks away. Meanwhile, Patricia wasn't idle. On day 3 of my official violation status, I found a notice attached to my front door. A $500 fine for non-compliance. On day 4, another $500. She was actually doing it. I contacted Gerald again, and he filed an emergency injunction with the county court to pause the fines until the appeal hearing. The judge granted it, which at least stopped the financial hemorrhaging, but it also seemed to make Patricia even more determined to make my life difficult. She started showing up at my house at random times, taking photographs of my property from the sidewalk. She measured the distance between my mailbox and the street curb, checked the height of my grass, and even counted the number of decorative stones in my front garden beds. Every tiny violation, real or imagined, got documented. Then November 28th arrived and the first snow started falling. I was at work, monitoring the weather on my phone. The forecast called for 6 to 8 inches overnight. My heated driveway system was ready. The sensors were primed, and everything was set to automatically activate once the temperature dropped below 32 degrees and precipitation was detected, except I couldn't turn it on. That morning, before I'd left for work, I'd received another certified letter. The county court injunction had prevented Patricia from continuing to fine me, but it hadn't prevented her from issuing a cease and use order. The letter explicitly stated that, until the appeal hearing was resolved, I was prohibited from operating the heated driveway system or utilizing the sensors in any capacity. Using them would constitute willful defiance of HOA authority and could result in immediate legal action, including a lawsuit and potential foreclosure proceedings. Gerald confirmed that yes, they could actually do this. The bylaws gave the HOA extraordinary power over property modifications and their use. By activating the system, I'd be opening myself up to a lawsuit that could cost me my house. That evening, I watched the snow fall from my living room window. It started around 6 o'clock, light flurries at first, then steadily increasing in intensity. By 8 o'clock, the ground was covered. By 10 o'clock, there were 3 inches on my driveway. I tried to go to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the snow accumulating, turning to ice, becoming impossible to remove. At midnight, I got up and looked out the window again. 4 inches, maybe 5. That's when I remembered what the sensor system did. It monitored temperature, precipitation, and snow accumulation rates. The sensors detected these conditions and triggered the heating elements. The system was automatic, smart, and efficient. If the HOA said I couldn't use the sensors or the heating system, fine. But they couldn't stop me from doing what the sensors did myself. At 12:30 in the morning, I got dressed in my winter coat, boots, gloves, and hat. I grabbed a folding chair from my garage, a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, and my smartphone with a weather app that showed temperature and precipitation data. Then I went outside and sat down in my driveway. If I couldn't use automated sensors to monitor the snow, I'd become the sensor myself. The temperature was 28 degrees. Snow was falling at a rate of about 1 inch per hour. Accumulation was currently at 5 inches and climbing. I sat in my folding chair, sipping coffee, watching the snow fall around me like some kind of insane winter sentinel. My neighbor, Dave Richardson, came out around 1 in the morning to let his dog out. He stopped when he saw me. "Kyle, what the hell are you doing, monitoring snow accumulation?" I said matter-of-factly. "In the middle of the night, in a folding chair." The HOA banned my heated driveway sensors, but they can't ban me from sitting in my own driveway and monitoring conditions manually. I'm doing exactly what the sensors would do, except I'm doing it myself. Dave stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're crazy, man." "Patricia's going to lose her mind." "Good. I hope she does." I stayed outside until 3 in the morning, by which point there were 7 inches of snow on the ground. I went inside, set an alarm for 6 o'clock, and got 3 hours of sleep. When the alarm went off, I made more coffee and went back outside. The neighborhood was waking up. People were starting their cars, scraping ice off windshields, shoveling driveways. And there I was, sitting in my folding chair in the middle of my snow-covered driveway, holding a thermos and a smartphone, manually monitoring conditions that should have been monitored automatically by $15,000 worth of technology. Patricia drove by at 7:30. I watched her car slow down, saw her head turn toward my house, saw her brake lights flash as she stopped in the middle of the street. She rolled down her window. "What do you think you're doing?" she called out. "Monitoring my driveway," I called back. "Since I can't use sensors, I'm doing it manually, completely within my rights. You're creating a spectacle. This is disruptive to the neighborhood. There's nothing in the bylaws that says I can't sit in my own driveway, unless you want to add that to your list of absurd restrictions." Her face turned red. She rolled up her window and drove off, tires spinning slightly in the snow. I stayed outside for another hour, then finally went in to shovel. The whole point of the heated driveway was to avoid this, but at least I'd made my point. Or so I thought. The next snowfall came 3 days later. This time it was during the afternoon. I was working from home, and as soon as the first flakes started falling, I grabbed my chair and went outside. I set up my laptop on a TV tray, connected to my phone's hotspot, and continued working while sitting in my driveway, manually monitoring the snow. My boss called me during a video conference. "Kyle, why are you sitting outside? It's snowing." "Long story, Janet. HOA issues." "Don't worry, I can still work. My laptop's fine." She looked confused but didn't press the issue. I finished out my workday sitting in the driveway, wearing fingerless gloves so I could type, my face getting steadily colder as the temperature dropped. Other neighbors started noticing. Some thought it was hilarious. Others thought I was having some kind of mental breakdown. But word spread quickly about what was happening, and more importantly, why I was doing it. The thing about HOAs is that everyone in the neighborhood is affected by them, and everyone has stories. Once people heard about Patricia's crusade against my heated driveway sensors, they started sharing their own Patricia stories. Tom Mitchell from 2 streets over had been fined for having a basketball hoop in his driveway. It was a temporary, portable hoop that his kids used, but Patricia said it violated the no recreational equipment visible from the street rule. Sarah Chen had been cited for hanging a bird feeder in her front yard tree. Too decorative, apparently. Marcus and Jennifer Torres had been rejected for a request to paint their front door navy blue instead of the approved black or brown. The list went on and on. Patricia had made enemies of half the neighborhood with her rigid enforcement of every minor bylaw, but nobody had ever really pushed back. The fines were expensive, the legal process was daunting, and most people just complied rather than fight. I wasn't most people. By the second week of December, I'd sat outside monitoring snow on 6 different occasions. Each time, I made a show of it. I'd bring my chair, my thermos, sometimes a blanket. I'd wave at people driving by. I'd take temperature readings every 15 minutes and log them in a notebook. I was meticulous, professional, and completely ridiculous. Local news got wind of it. A reporter from KARE 11, a station out of the Twin Cities, showed up at my house on a Wednesday afternoon. "Mr. Watson, I'm Rebecca Torres with KARE 11 News. We heard about your situation with the HOA. Would you be willing to do an interview?" I was sitting in my driveway at the time, monitoring a light snowfall. Sure, why not? The interview aired that evening. They titled the segment Man vs. HOA, the Snow Monitoring Standoff. I explained the whole situation, showed them the tiny sensors that had caused all this trouble, and demonstrated my manual monitoring process. "So you're essentially doing the job of a computer," Rebecca said, "because your HOA won't let the computer do it." Exactly. If they have a problem with sensors, they shouldn't have a problem with me being the sensor. Unless they want to add homeowners can't sit in their own driveways to the bylaws. The story went viral. By the next morning, it had been picked up by national news outlets. Social media exploded with people mocking the HOA, praising my petty compliance, and sharing their own HOA horror stories. The hashtag homeowner censor started trending. Patricia called an emergency HOA board meeting. She sent out notices to all homeowners, stating that they would be discussing disruptive behavior and media attention, and that my appeal hearing would be moved up to address the situation immediately. The meeting was scheduled for December 15th at 7 in the evening at the community clubhouse. Gerald advised me to attend and to bring documentation of everything: the sensor specs, the installation costs, the bylaws, and a log of all my manual monitoring sessions. "This could go either way," Gerald said. "Either the public pressure will force them to back down, or they'll double down and try to make an example of you. Be prepared for both." The clubhouse was packed when I arrived. Apparently, Every homeowner in Riverside Meadows wanted to see how this would play out. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members, Richard Carlson, the treasurer, and Deborah Young, the secretary. All three looked deeply unhappy. Patricia called the meeting to order. We're here tonight to address the appeal filed by Kyle Watson regarding his unauthorized property modification, and to discuss his recent behavior which has brought unwanted media attention to our community. Unwanted by whom? Someone called out from the back. There were murmurs of agreement. Patricia's jaw tightened. The board believes that Mr. Watson's actions have been deliberately disruptive and designed to mock the authority of this HOA. We take our responsibilities seriously, and we will not be intimidated by media stunts. I stood up. I'm not mocking anyone. I installed a heated driveway system that would make winter safer and easier. You banned the sensors. Fine. But you can't ban me from monitoring my own property. I'm doing exactly what those sensors would do, just manually. If that seems ridiculous, maybe it's because the ban itself is ridiculous. Applause broke out. Patricia banged her gavel. Order. This is not a town hall. This is an official HOA board meeting. Gerald stood up beside me. Miss Hendricks, if I may. I'm Gerald Simmons, Mr. Watson's legal counsel. I'd like to point out several issues with the board's handling of this situation. First, the Architectural Review Committee's reasoning for denying the modification request is extremely vague. Aesthetic uniformity and technological intrusions are subjective terms that aren't clearly defined in the bylaws. Second, the sensors in question are minimally visible and serve a legitimate safety purpose. Third, Minnesota state law actually encourages energy-efficient home improvements, including heated driveways, as they reduce salt usage and environmental impact. Your blanket rejection may actually violate state statutes. Patricia looked at Richard and Deborah, who both looked uncomfortable. We are within our rights to maintain community standards, Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Are you within your rights to issue a cease and use order that prevents a safety system from functioning? Gerald pressed. Because that's a potential liability issue. If Mr. Watson or a guest slips on his icy driveway because you prevented him from using a safety system, the HOA could be held partially responsible. That caused a stir in the room. Richard leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. She shook her head firmly. The modification request was denied based on the committee's assessment. That decision stands. Then I'd like to propose something, I said. You say the sensors disrupt aesthetic uniformity. Fine. What if I paint them to match the driveway? What if I modify them to be even less visible? I'm willing to work with you here. The issue isn't just visibility, Patricia said. It's about setting precedent. If we allow your sensors, then everyone will want to install similar technology. Before we know it, our neighborhood will be filled with wires, cameras, and devices. You mean modern safety equipment? Tom Mitchell called out. God forbid we make our homes safer and more efficient. More applause. Patricia was losing control of the room. I motion that we vote on the appeal, Richard said suddenly. All board members present public vote. Let's settle this now. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. Richard, we don't have to. I'm the treasurer, Patricia. I'm looking at our finances. Do you know how much it's going to cost us if Kyle takes this to court? If we lose? We're already looking at thousands in legal fees just from tonight. I motion to vote. I second, Deborah said quietly. Patricia had no choice. Fine. All in favor of upholding the denial of Kyle Watson's modification request. Patricia raised her hand. Nobody else did. All in favor of approving the request. Richard and Deborah raised their hands. The appeal is approved, Richard said. "Kyle, you can use your sensors." The room erupted in cheers. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. 3 months of stress, cold nights sitting in my driveway, legal fees, media attention, and it was finally over. Except it wasn't. Patricia stood up, her face pale with anger. "This is a mistake. This board is making a terrible mistake. You're undermining everything we've worked to build here." "What we've built is a community," Deborah said, her voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. "And part of being a community is being reasonable. Kyle's sensors aren't hurting anyone. You've been too rigid, Patricia. A lot of us have been thinking that for a while now." "If you feel that way, perhaps you should find a new HOA president," Patricia snapped. "Maybe we should," Richard said. I motioned for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president to be held at next month's general meeting. "I second," Deborah said immediately. Patricia grabbed her papers and her gavel. "Fine. Have your vote. I'm done with this circus." She walked out of the clubhouse, the door slamming behind her. The meeting continued for another hour. We discussed the motion of no confidence, set a date for the vote, and several people expressed interest in running for board positions. By the time I left, I felt like I'd witnessed a small revolution. Gerald walked me to my car. That went better than expected. "I can't believe she just stormed out." Pride. She built her entire identity around being the strict enforcer. When that got challenged, she couldn't handle it. "Do you think she'll really step down? If the vote goes against her, she won't have a choice." The next morning, I woke up to the most beautiful sight I'd seen in months. My driveway was completely clear. Snow had fallen during the night, but the sensors had detected it. The system had activated, and every flake had melted on contact. It was exactly what I'd paid for, exactly what I'd fought for, and it felt amazing. I took a photo and posted it on social media with the caption "Sensors. 1 HOA. 0. Thanks to everyone who supported me through this ridiculous battle. My driveway is clear. My back is grateful, and I'll never take automated technology for granted again." The post got thousands of likes and shares. Messages poured in from people across the country who dealt with similar HOA nightmares. Some were funny, some were sad, but all of them shared a common theme. HOAs wielded tremendous power, and very few people ever challenged them. December 21st brought another snowstorm, this one dumping nearly a foot of snow on Bloomington. I stayed inside, warm and comfortable, while my driveway remained perfectly clear. My neighbors weren't so lucky. I watched them shovel, their backs bent, their breath visible in the cold air. Tom Mitchell came over that afternoon. "You know what? Your system has me thinking. I'm going to install one too. I'm done with shoveling." "You should," I said. "And now there's precedent. The HOA can't deny your request without looking like hypocrites." Over the next few weeks, 3 more neighbors submitted modification requests for heated driveway systems. The Architectural Review Committee, now without Patricia's iron grip, approved all of them. The vote of no confidence was held on January 10th. Patricia didn't even show up. The vote was 83% in favor of removing her as president. Richard was elected as the new president, and one of his first acts was to form a committee to review the HOA bylaws and identify rules that were overly restrictive or poorly defined. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. Then February arrived, and things took a turn I never saw coming. I came home from work on a Tuesday to find 2 police cars parked in front of Patricia's house. Officers were walking in and out, carrying boxes. Yellow police tape blocked off her front door. Neighbors stood in clusters on the sidewalk, whispering and pointing. I walked over to where Tom and his wife Linda were standing. "What happened?" "Nobody knows for sure," Linda said. Police showed up about an hour ago with a warrant. They've been searching her house ever since. A warrant for what? That's what we're trying to figure out. We didn't have to wait long. That evening, the local news reported that Patricia Hendricks, former HOA president of Riverside Meadows subdivision, had been arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud. According to the investigation, she'd been systematically stealing money from the HOA's operating budget for over 3 years, diverting funds into personal accounts and falsifying financial records. The total amount was estimated at over $200,000. I sat on my couch, stunned. All this time, while she'd been obsessing over sensors and mailboxes and door colors, she'd been stealing from every homeowner in the neighborhood. Our HOA dues, which were supposed to pay for landscaping, snow removal, community amenities, and maintenance, had been lining her pockets. Richard called an emergency meeting the next evening. The clubhouse was even more packed than it had been in December, but this time the mood was different. People were angry, scared, and demanding answers. "I've been going through the financial records with our accountant," Richard said, his voice grave. "Patricia had sole access to the accounts for years. She never provided detailed reports, just summary statements. We trusted her. That was our mistake." "How did she get caught?" someone asked. "A forensic audit. After she left, I wanted to understand our actual financial position, so I hired an independent auditor. They found discrepancies immediately. Payments to vendors that never existed, transfers to accounts that weren't HOA-related, falsified invoices. It was systematic and extensive. "Can we get the money back?" Marcus Torres asked. "That's what the prosecutors are working on. They've frozen her assets, but it's unclear how much she actually has left. She may have spent it. We might recover some through restitution, but it'll be a long process." The meeting devolved into angry voices, accusations, and recriminations. How had this happened? Why hadn't anyone caught it sooner? What oversight had been in place? The truth was, everyone had been too intimidated by Patricia to question her. She'd run the HOA like a dictator, and nobody had dared to challenge her authority. Until I had, over something as simple as driveway sensors. Gerald called me the next day. "Kyle, you might have inadvertently exposed a major crime." "I was just trying to use my heated driveway, Gerald." "I know, but think about it. Your fight with Patricia brought media attention, which brought scrutiny, which led to Richard taking over and ordering the audit. If you just removed your sensors like she wanted, she might have kept stealing for years." It was a strange thought. All I'd wanted was to avoid shoveling snow. Instead, I'd somehow triggered the downfall of a corrupt HOA president. Patricia's trial took place over several months. I was called as a witness, not about the financial crimes, but about her behavior and management style. The prosecution argued that her obsessive need to control every aspect of the neighborhood, combined with her aggressive enforcement of minor rules, was part of a pattern of authoritarian behavior that enabled her to commit fraud without oversight. She was ultimately convicted on 12 counts of embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of funds. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution, though the likelihood of actually recovering all the money was slim. Her assets were liquidated, including her house, but it still didn't cover the full amount. The Riverside Meadows HOA underwent major restructuring. Richard implemented new bylaws that required financial transparency, mandatory audits, term limits for board members, and a system of checks and balances that prevented any single person from having too much control. The Architectural Review Committee was reformed with clearer guidelines. Modification requests were evaluated based on safety, practicality, and minimal impact, rather than subjective aesthetic judgments. Tom, Sarah, and several others who'd been denied reasonable requests before resubmitted them and got approved. By the time spring arrived, the neighborhood felt different. People were friendlier, more engaged. The community events that had felt mandatory and stiff under Patricia's rule became actually enjoyable. We had a neighborhood barbecue in May where people actually laughed and joked instead of worrying about breaking some obscure bylaw. I was grilling burgers with Tom when he brought up the whole saga. "You know, Kyle, you're kind of a legend now. The guy who took on the HOA over heated driveway sensors and ended up exposing massive fraud." "I just wanted my driveway to stay clear," I said, flipping a burger. "Yeah, but you stood your ground. Literally. You sat outside in the snow like a lunatic to make your point. That took guts." "Or stupidity." "Probably both," Tom laughed, "but it worked. This neighborhood is so much better now, we owe you for that. You don't owe me anything, we all live here, we all benefit from having a sane HOA. Still, thanks for being the crazy guy who fought back." I accepted the thanks, though I still found the whole thing surreal. All I'd done was refuse to accept an unreasonable decision. I'd used malicious compliance, a bit of creativity, and a willingness to look ridiculous to make my point. The fact that it had exposed criminal activity was just a bonus. That summer, I got a call from a publisher. They wanted to write a book about my experience, turning it into a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of community oversight. I declined. I'd had enough attention to last a lifetime. But I did agree to speak at a local government meeting about HOA reform. Minnesota was considering new legislation that would require greater transparency and financial accountability for HOAs across the state. My story, along with Patricia's crimes, had become part of the conversation about how to prevent similar situations. Standing in front of the county board, I kept my remarks simple. I installed a heated driveway system because I live in Minnesota and I'm tired of shoveling. The HOA said no because of sensors that were barely visible. So I sat outside and became a human sensor. It was absurd, but it was also necessary. Nobody should have to fight that hard just to make their home safer and more comfortable. And nobody should be able to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars because they've intimidated everyone into not asking questions. HOAs serve a purpose, but they need oversight, transparency, and accountability. Thank you. The legislation passed 6 months later. It required all HOAs in Minnesota to conduct annual independent audits, provide detailed financial reports to homeowners, and establish term limits for board members. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. By the time winter rolled around again, I'd almost forgotten about the whole ordeal. Almost. The first snow of the season fell on a Saturday morning in November. I woke up, made coffee, and looked out my window. My driveway was clear, melted snow running in small streams toward the street. The sensors had detected the precipitation, the system had activated, and everything had worked exactly as designed. I took my coffee and went outside, standing on my perfectly clear driveway in my slippers and robe. Tom saw me from his window and came out. "Gloating," he called over. "A little," I admitted. "Fair enough. Hey, my system's being installed next week. Can't wait. You're going to love it. It's like magic." As I stood there, sipping my coffee in the cold morning air, I realized something. I could have given up. I could have removed the sensors, taken the loss, and moved on. Most people would have. The path of least resistance is always tempting, especially when you're fighting against an organization with money, bylaws, and the weight of bureaucracy on their side. But sometimes the principle matters more than the convenience. Sometimes you have to be willing to look ridiculous, To be the guy sitting in a folding chair in the snow at midnight, just to prove that unjust rules shouldn't go unchallenged. I finished my coffee and went back inside. The driveway stayed clear all winter. The sensors did their job without complaint, monitoring temperature and precipitation with electronic precision, never needing a folding chair or a thermos of coffee. And every time it snowed, I felt a small surge of satisfaction knowing that I'd fought for the right to use them, and won. The house on Maple Ridge Drive remained my home. The Riverside Meadows HOA remained my HOA, but it was better now. Not perfect, but better. Richard proved to be a reasonable president. The bylaws became more sensible. The community became more like an actual community rather than a dictatorship. Patricia served her time in a minimum security facility in Shakopee. I heard through the grapevine that she maintained her innocence for the first 2 years, insisting that she'd only borrowed the money and had planned to pay it back. Eventually, she stopped protesting. I don't know if she felt remorse or just accepted reality. The recovered funds were distributed back to homeowners as credits against future HOA dues. I got about $1,800 back, which didn't cover my legal fees but was better than nothing. More importantly, the financial reforms ensured it would never happen again. In the spring of my 3rd year in the house, I was elected to the HOA board as a regular member. I didn't want to be president, but I wanted a voice in how things were run. My first proposal was to establish a fund for home safety improvements, offering small grants or interest-free loans to homeowners who wanted to install security systems, heated driveways, or other safety features. It passed unanimously. Tom and Linda got their heated driveway system installed that fall. So did Sarah Chen. Marcus and Jennifer Torres opted for a comprehensive home security system. The neighborhood became safer, more modern, and more comfortable, all because people were empowered to make reasonable improvements without arbitrary restrictions. I still have the folding chair I used during those cold nights of manual snow monitoring. It sits in my garage, a reminder of the most absurd battle I've ever fought. Sometimes I look at it and laugh. Sometimes I shake my head in disbelief that things got that crazy. But mostly, I'm just glad I stood my ground. The heated driveway works perfectly. The sensors are still there, small black boxes barely visible against the concrete, monitoring temperature and precipitation with quiet efficiency. They've never caused problems. They've never diminished property values. They've never disrupted aesthetic uniformity. They just do their job, keeping my driveway clear and safe, exactly as they were designed to do, and I never have to shovel snow again. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd just complied. If I'd removed the sensors, taken the loss, and moved on. Patricia would still be HOA president, still stealing money, still terrorizing neighbors over minor infractions. The fraud might have continued for years. The amount stolen might have doubled or tripled. One person's willingness to fight an unjust rule had ripple effects nobody could have predicted. That's the thing about standing up to authority. You never know what else might change as a result. You never know who else might find the courage to speak up, what other problems might come to light, what reforms might follow. All because someone refused to accept an unreasonable answer to a simple question. Can I use sensors to keep my driveway clear of snow? The answer, eventually, was yes. But getting there required sitting in a folding chair at midnight in sub-zero temperatures, becoming a human snow sensor, looking absolutely ridiculous on local and national news, and accidentally exposing massive financial fraud. Was it worth it? Every time I walk out to my car on a snowy morning and don't have to shovel, I think yes. Every time I see Tom or Sarah or Marcus, And they thank me for making the neighborhood better. I think yes. Every time I remember Patricia's face when she realized she was losing control, when the room turned against her, when her authority crumbled. I think yes. Not because I wanted revenge or to humiliate her, but because unjust authority should be challenged. Unreasonable rules should be questioned. And people who abuse power should face consequences. My heated driveway sensors taught me that lesson. Well, that and to always read the HOA bylaws before installing expensive home improvements. But mostly the first thing. I'm Kyle Watson, homeowner in Riverside Meadows Subdivision, Bloomington, Minnesota. I fought my HOA over driveway sensors. I became a human snow monitor. I exposed financial fraud. And my driveway stays clear all winter long. It was the most absurd, frustrating, ridiculous, and ultimately rewarding battle I've ever fought. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat.